Part 5. Emergency Response. The monstrosity roared. Its mass of tentacles slipped inside windows, pierced through brick walls, and dug into the concrete as it hauled its giant mass out of the crater and onto the street. It was so large that buildings broke and crumbled as it shoved its way through StevensTWD. Whatever this thing was, where it had come from, it had to be some kind of delay tactic. Releasing a creature like this would be seen on cameras and shared worldwide if there was anyone other than us alive in the area. Umbrella's taking a huge risk letting something like this loose, Alice observed as she prepared to engage the monster. If images of this thing gets out, they'll be exposed for having returned and started creating bioweapons again. I don't know, I smirked. People might forgive them if they see me. Ha! Alice barked out a laugh. You might be right. Should we give them the benefit of the doubt and see if this thing just wants to be friends? No thanks, I laughed. Nothing good comes from anything with tentacles. Yeah, I've had my share of experiences, Alice sighed as she ran to flank the monstrosity. Never ends well. Then let's handle this thing and move on, I hollered as I ran straight at the creature. I wanted to see just what I could do to this thing. I ducked, dodged, and hopped over multiple tentacle strikes as I closed in. I threw as hard a punch as I could as I got in close. The creature's bulbous form bowed from the blow, and the power of the hit sent ripples through its body, but the force of it was thrown out to the sides, where it was pressed between the buildings on either side of the street. The remaining energy was enough to blow the top half of the buildings away. When the blow failed to do what I expected, I stopped and looked up at the thing in surprise. Well, seems like you can take a beating. I jumped and rolled out of the way of a tentacle that slammed into the ground where I had been. Alice was running along the creature's back, popping its eyes with precision gunshots. She was doing an excellent job of keeping the creature distracted, though every time she blew out one of its eyes, it regenerated after a few moments. Still, that would at least serve to drain whatever resources it drew on to recover from its injuries. I flicked my arms forward and snatched the meat hooks as they swung up to meet my hands. I had to dodge several attacks before I could begin slashing at the creature with the hooks. The hooks allowed me to cut deep gouges into its flesh. Its midnight blood sprayed out in thick, viscous eruptions. The gouges sealed themselves in time, but I knew what needed to be done. Alice had the right idea. If we popped enough of the eyes, we could possibly overwhelm its regeneration. I launched one of the meat hooks up to the closest eye. The hook bit into the sensitive organ and ripped it open, spilling a yellow fluid and anxious steam that made me retch from a distance. The hook lodged itself into the eyelid, and I used that hold to begin my ascent. I repeated the attack, throwing the hooks to catch the eyes, and pulled myself further up the creature's body. All the while, I was dodging tentacle attacks and the creature's mouths that extended out to try and bite me whenever I passed one. "You got any explosives?" Alice shouted as she threw a grenade into one of snapping mouths. "What you see is what I got," I answered as I ran along the creature to reach its head. The grenade went off and threw meat and gore across the side of a building. The creature roared in pain and stumbled, crushing a building in the process. "You keep doing that, and this is going to be one bumpy ride," I called back to Alice. "Maybe, but at least it'll be dead," she laughed in reply. "Not likely," I said, and pointed to where the grenade had exploded. The hole was already beginning to close. "Not unless you don't have about 20 more of those things." "I'm starting to wish I did," Alice growled as she unloaded her guns into another pair of eyes. "We'll figure something," I yelped as the monster's body opened up beneath me. It had mutated a mouth and opened it. I grabbed one of its teeth and quickly used it to pull myself out of the mouth just before it snapped closed. "Shit!" Alice said as she ran over and helped me to my feet. "I didn't think it could do that." "Yeah," I huffed as I kicked the mountain of flesh in irritation. "Going to have to watch out for that." I don't suppose you have any idea of how to beat this thing, do you? Hi. Alice asked, then quickly dodged a tentacle strike. Yeah, I do, I growled as I sliced a tentacle away. But I prefer to play by the rules if I can help it. Alice unloaded a burst of gunfire into another eye, popping it, and sending out a spray of noxious steam in the process. Not to question your morals in a time like this, but it doesn't look like Umbrella's too concerned about playing by the rules. I'd forgive you if you wanted to cheat. I don't think you understand the consequences of what it means for me to cheat, I growled and sliced into the monster's body several times with my meat hooks. Are the consequences a giant mutated creature that's knocking down buildings as it tries to move down the street? Alice asked. No, I admitted. They'd be worse. Alice paused and looked at me. What? Ow! The momentary distraction was enough for a tentacle to slam into her ribs and send her flying through the air. She crashed through a window and was gone from sight. Damn, I groaned as I looked at the mountain of flesh beneath my feet. I had a few options to handle these things, but I wasn't sure if I should exercise them just yet. Hey, a woman's voice called from above me. I looked up to see a woman with short brown hair, blue eyes, a blue tank top, and black pants waving at me. It was Jill Valentine. She was leaning over the top of a nearby building. I smiled and waved at her. You need to get out of here. It's not safe, I shouted. No kidding, she yelled back. Try this. She disappeared over the side for a moment before she reappeared, spinning her body as she used both hands to throw a long weapon transport box my way. I ran over the monster's body and jumped up to catch the box in mid-air. After landing, I opened the box to find a rocket, and 4 rockets. I quickly loaded the launcher and tucked the remaining 3 rockets into my belts. Looking up at Jill, I gave her a wave of thanks. This could do the job if I handled things correctly. I ran back toward the monster's head, dodging and slicing at tentacles, and leaping over quickly mutated mouths. As I approached the neck, I dove off the side of the monster and threw out a meat hook so that it bit into the creature's neck and tore a gash down the side. As I swung under the creature's neck, I threw the second hook to do the same thing to the other side of its neck. With the 2 gashes in the side of its neck, I used a meat hook to catch the monster's jaw. I wrenched the thing's primary mouth open and swung out in front of it. Open wide, you ugly puss bucket, I yelled as I pulled on the chain, forcing its mouth open wider and pulling me into its maw at the same time. The smell inside of its mouth made me want to retch, but my journey wasn't over. I ran to the back of its mouth and jumped down its throat. Slime and saliva coated me as I was swallowed. I landed in a pool of stomach acid, which began to burn and eat away at me. I waded through the acid, grimacing as I tried to ignore the pain. I speared the back end of the rockets into the stomach wall and then tanned to the opposite side of its stomach. This is going to be some major heartburn. I grinned as I aimed the rocket launcher at the other rockets and fired. The creature exploded from the inside out. Its head had completely separated from its body. An ocean of blood and flesh flooded the streets. I could hear someone yelling. It was muffled and seemed to come from far away. I couldn't see, couldn't move. It seemed like hours before my vision started to return in a bright blur of shapes. A figure appeared over me just as my hearing started to clear up. Holy shit! She actually blew herself up to kill that thing, Alice said. Bad way to go, though, Jill replied. I tried to respond, but the only thing that escaped my mouth was a dry, cracking choke of air. Jesus! Jill shouted as she jumped back. She's still alive? Damn, they built her to last, Alice gasped. I started getting feeling back in my body again. The burning sensation of raw nerves exposed to the air screamed through my body. I groaned and wheezed out a complaint as my bones, muscles, and skin wove itself back together. I could feel limbs reattach themselves. After what I assumed must have been hours, my senses were restored. I could move my body again, and I stood up from the pools of blood and gore I had been laying in. "What the hell are you?" Jill asked as she stared at me wide-eyed. "I've seen monsters that have been put down with half the damage you just took, and you got up from all that in just a few minutes." I groaned as the memory of the pain began to subside. Minutes? It felt like hours. That hurt like hell. "You okay to keep going?" Alice asked. I nodded and looked around. "Lost my meat hooks." "I'm sure you'll manage," Alice smirked, then looked at Jill. "Thanks for the backup, but you probably need to head back to HQ." Jill nodded in agreement. "Right. Radio us if you need anything." She looked at me with a mixture of fear and amazement again before running off. Alice looked at me. "Are you good to continue?" I stretched and nodded. "Yeah. I feel fresh now. Just had to blow off some steam." "God, your sense of humor is morbid," she snickered. "Hey, I just blew myself up to kill that thing," I laughed. "I earned the morbidity." "That you did," she said, and motioned that we should keep moving. We ran as fast as Alice could keep up. It took us several minutes, but we finally arrived back at the facility's lot. My brows knit together in a scowl as I saw the place again. It had been the place of nightmares, torture, and pain. To anyone else, it looked like a non-assuming warehouse with nothing to make it stand out from any of the others. But to me, it was a source of horrors, the likes of which I had never known. I shifted my vision to include the electromagnetic spectrum. Lines of electrical power, digital code, wireless signals, and more were overlaid across my vision. I hesitated, moving closer to the building while I analyzed the signals I could see. I knew Alice had a similar ability when it came to Umbrella's systems, so I assumed she was going something similar. "The place has gone dark," I said in irritation. "They must have shut it down as soon as I left." "Doesn't matter," Alice growled. "There's still information we can pull from those systems. We just need to get our hands on them." "Yeah, you're right," I agreed, and started marching toward the building. Alice fell in behind me, but let out a gasp of surprise as she bumped into a force field that went up as I stepped past the facility's gate. I turned and looked at her. "What's that?" "Some kind of shield," Alice replied, as she thumped a fist against the shield that rippled with blue energy. "I guess the facility isn't as shut down as we thought," I sighed. "You wait here, I'll see if I can't shut it off." "All right," Alice said, giving a deflated sigh. "Be careful in there." I nodded, then turned to walk back to the entrance of the facility. I passed the crimson spray that used to be Chris Redfield, the craters that had been used to delay me. I entered the warehouse facade and looked at the multiple blood spatters and blood pools that I had made when Ada and Chris kept shooting me to keep me down. I stared at the blood. I couldn't help but wonder how I'd survived all that had happened to me since I'd woken up. It was then that I realized that the light in the warehouse was dimming. It wasn't dimming. It was shifting color. And it wasn't the light in the warehouse. It was the light from outside affecting the light in the warehouse. I turned and looked back to see red light filling the area, just in time to have the world around me explode in a blinding flash. The sun was setting by the time I woke up in a pool of water. I could feel my body popping, knitting, and snapping back into place. I groaned as the pain encompassed my entire being. I coughed and stood up. Looking around, I was finally able to figure out where I was. I was at the bottom of a massive crater. I had to crane my neck just to see the surface level. Whatever had caused that explosion had destroyed the entire facility. I looked at my hands and arms and noticed that they were still burned and cut. Whatever that had been, it had been nearly enough to overcome my ability to heal through it. I was slowly becoming whole, but I had to wonder if I would be able to survive another explosion like that, or if my adaptability would allow me to tank another one. "Subject is still alive!" A panicked voice called over a speaker that had somehow survived the explosion. Fire another orbital shot! Keep firing until it is down! Keep firing? Orbital shot? It took me a moment to process through the pain and regeneration fatigue what the voice was talking about. It wasn't until a hair-thin line of light appeared in front of me and started boiling the water I was standing in that I realized what was happening. Umbrella had fired an orbital laser that had to be fired with nearly 180 gigawatts of power to create a hole this big. They did it to destroy their facility and in an attempt to kill me. I grinned up at the sky as the red thread of light began to expand. You better pray this works, because if it doesn't,